until Army General walked in and saluted him. The laughter echoed across the luxurious garden like a storm that refused to end. Expensive crystal glasses sparkled beneath the bright afternoon sun, elegant guests smiled behind polished masks, and cameras captured every glamorous moment of the charity celebration. In the center of it all stood a tired single father wearing an old navy blue suit that had clearly seen better days. His young daughter held his hand tightly, trying to smile despite hearing the whispers around them. Then the famous CEO hosting the event looked directly at him with a mocking smile that encouraged the crowd to laugh even louder. For a few painful seconds, it seemed as though the world had decided that a man's value could be measured only by the clothes he wore. But no one at that party knew that within minutes a decorated army general would step through the entrance, walk straight past every billionaire in attendance, and stop in front of the quiet single dad before delivering a perfect military salute that would silence every voice in the garden forever. Before we continue, if you believe kindness is stronger than pride and that everyone deserves a second chance, please like this video, leave a comment, share it with your friends, and subscribe to Single Dad Empire. Your support helps us bring more emotional stories that inspire millions around the world. The single father's name was Elias Rowan, a humble mechanic who spent his days repairing old delivery trucks in a small workshop on the edge of town. Every morning began before sunrise because he had to prepare breakfast, braid his 8-year-old daughter Nora's hair as neatly as he could, and walk her to school before beginning another exhausting day covered in grease and engine oil. Life had not been kind to Elias. 5 years earlier, his beloved wife had passed away after a long illness, leaving him alone to raise their daughter while struggling under growing debts. Every paycheck disappeared almost immediately into rent, school supplies, groceries, and hospital bills that still haunted him long after the funeral had ended. Yet despite carrying so much pain, Elias refused to let bitterness become part of his daughter's childhood. He smiled when she needed hope, laughed when she needed courage, and quietly cried only after she had fallen asleep. Nora was the brightest light in his world. She never complained about their tiny apartment or the second-hand clothes she wore to school. She knew her father skipped meals so she could have fresh fruit in her lunchbox. She noticed every sacrifice even when he tried to hide it. To her, Elias was already a hero because he never stopped fighting for their future. One afternoon Nora brought home an invitation from school announcing a charity scholarship event hosted by one of the country's most successful business leaders, CEO Vivian Ashcroft. Outstanding students had been selected to attend with their parents, and Nora had earned her place through exceptional academic achievements. The event promised scholarships for children from hardworking families. Elias hesitated after reading the invitation because he owned only one old suit, but he could never deny his daughter an opportunity she had worked so hard to earn. The morning of the celebration arrived beneath clear blue skies. Sunlight filled the city with warmth as father and daughter boarded a crowded bus toward the magnificent Ashcroft estate. The mansion looked more like a palace than a home. Perfect gardens surrounded marble fountains, luxury cars lined the entrance, and elegantly dressed guests filled every pathway. Nora squeezed her father's hand with excitement while Elias quietly reminded himself that they belonged there because of her achievements, not because of their financial status. Inside the enormous garden, waiters carried silver trays filled with gourmet food while musicians performed soft classical melodies beneath white silk canopies. Everything reflected wealth beyond imagination. Some guests welcomed Nora warmly after learning she was one of the scholarship finalists, but many others stared at Elias with barely hidden judgment. His worn shoes and faded suit stood out among designer fashion worth thousands of dollars. Vivian Ashcroft soon appeared before the guests surrounded by photographers and executives. She had built one of the nation's largest technology companies and had become famous for her intelligence, ambition, and public image as a generous philanthropist. Her speech praised education, determination, and opportunity. The audience applauded enthusiastically. As the scholarship finalists were introduced one by one, Nora proudly walked beside her father onto the stage area. She smiled nervously while looking at the audience, believing this day might change their lives forever. Then everything changed. Vivian's eyes paused on Elias for a brief moment before a faint smile crossed her face. She quietly made a sarcastic remark about how charity events seemed to attract people who confused invitations with rescue missions. Several nearby executives laughed. Their laughter spread through the crowd until dozens of guests joined without fully understanding why. Some looked directly at Elias' old suit. Others whispered about whether someone like him truly belonged among successful people. The laughter hurt far more than any insult. Nora lowered her head, her small fingers gripping her father's hand so tightly they almost trembled. Elias felt every mocking glance like another weight pressing against his heart. Yet instead of showing anger, he simply placed his free hand gently on his daughter's shoulder, silently reminding her that dignity never depended on the opinions of strangers. Just then, the sound of several military vehicles approaching interrupted the celebration. It was General Augustus Hale, one of the nation's most decorated military leaders. Everyone assumed he had arrived as the guest of honor for Vivian Ashcroft. She quickly walked toward him with a welcoming smile, expecting recognition before the assembled crowd. Instead, the general politely nodded to her without slowing his pace. His eyes searched the gathering until they found Elias Rowan. Without hesitation, General Hale crossed the garden directly toward the single father. Every guest watched in complete confusion. The general stopped only a few feet away before standing perfectly straight. Then, with absolute precision and deep respect, he raised his hand in a flawless military salute. The entire garden fell into complete silence. Many guests stared in disbelief. Cameras instantly shifted away from the CEO and focused on the unbelievable scene unfolding before them. General Hale lowered his salute only after several respectful seconds. His voice carried calmly across the silent garden as he explained that years earlier, during a devastating flood that struck a remote military community, then civilian volunteer Elias Rowan had repeatedly entered collapsing buildings to rescue trapped families despite having no protective equipment and no obligation to risk his own life. Among those rescued had been the general's young son, who would not have survived without Elias' courage. When everyone else fled rising floodwaters, Elias kept returning until every child had been carried to safety. The general admitted that official recognition had never fully reflected the extraordinary bravery shown that day because Elias had refused every public award, insisting he had simply done what any decent human being should have done. Yet the military had never forgotten his courage or his character. Tears filled many eyes throughout the audience. Guests who had laughed only moments earlier suddenly avoided looking at Elias altogether. General Hale continued by revealing that after the flood, Elias had quietly declined several financial rewards because other affected families needed the assistance more than he did. Even after losing his own home during the disaster, he chose compassion over personal gain. According to the general, true heroes rarely announced themselves. They simply appeared when others needed them most. Nora looked at her father with eyes filled with pride unlike anything she had ever felt before. For years she had known he was her hero. Now she realized the world was finally beginning to understand why. Vivian Ashcroft stood motionless. Every carefully planned moment of her glamorous event had disappeared beneath the weight of one simple military salute. The applause began slowly from one elderly veteran standing near the stage. Another guest joined. Then another. Within seconds the entire garden erupted into a standing ovation that seemed endless. Not for wealth. Not for business success. Not for public image. It was for quiet integrity that had remained invisible beneath an old suit. General Hale requested that Elias stand beside him during the scholarship ceremony instead of remaining among the audience. Reluctantly, the humble father agreed only because Nora smiled through tears and gently encouraged him forward. When the scholarship winners were announced, Nora received the highest educational award of the afternoon. Her dedication, kindness, and academic excellence had earned a full scholarship funded jointly by the Military Education Foundation and several anonymous donors inspired by her father's example. But the greatest reward came afterward. Vivian approached Elias privately, no longer surrounded by cameras or executives. The confidence that had defined her public image had been replaced by genuine humility. She admitted that success had blinded her into judging people by appearances instead of character. Watching an entire crowd laugh at an honorable man because of an old suit had forced her to confront uncomfortable truths about herself. Elias accepted her apology with quiet grace, not because she deserved forgiveness, but because he refused to allow bitterness to become another lesson his daughter carried into adulthood. Months later, Vivian transformed her charitable foundation. Instead of celebrating wealthy donors, it began honoring ordinary people performing extraordinary acts of kindness. Mechanics, teachers, nurses, firefighters, janitors, veterans, and single parents became the true faces of her campaigns. Thousands of struggling families received opportunities that once seemed impossible. Nora continued excelling in school, inspired every day by the values her father had lived rather than spoken. Elias remained at his small repair shop, never seeking fame or recognition.